to our what is this? This is April. Our April meeting. Our special guest tonight is Tom Ashmore, and he will be talking about following the Butterfield Trail across West Texas, Fort Chadbourne to Fort Stockton, a 17-year project in historical archaeology. Um, also, if you at this time, if you could please turn off your microphones, and if needed, if you're going to be doing a lot of moving around, if you could also turn off your cameras, that would be much appreciated as well. And with that, I will give the floor to you, Tom.
All right. I'll have to share, I guess, here.
Yes, and it should already be ready to go.
Okay. I'm trying to get it up. Hmm. All right. So, as she said, it's been a 17-year project for me. Uh, Started back when we started working on Fort Chadbourne, and I got the wild idea to start trying to follow the trail. What you're looking at here is a 1858 drawing from the newspaper of the changeover when they came into Texas, and they would change from the Concord coach to the Celerity mud wagon coach, and they would use that all the way through Texas. We came across this just recently, and it's pretty good. This was during a trip across West Texas. So before I get started, I'd talk a little bit about how I've been doing this. I started off trying to find the trail using Google Earth way back when Google Earth was not quite so popular, but I had learned to use satellite imagery from my military time, and decided to see if I could transfer those skills over, and started trying to follow it. So I'll show you here just a quick little tutoring on how you can find the trail. It obviously becomes a depression from the wagon use over and over again. When it gets abandoned, the soil comes in, the rain comes in, bushes start growing out of it in a line. And then if you can learn to follow that line properly, then you can follow the trail. And in different places, you have to get on the ground and verify it, of course. And on the left side here, there's two different pictures of what the trail looks like uh, at different locations here in West Texas. One is just the grass growing here, and it's just a very mild depression, but you can see that the grass grows different in that location. And the other one's a much deeper trail uh, that is going through would have been a boggier ground at the time. And the Butterfield Trail here on the bottom here is what it looks like from the satellite imagery. It usually grows bushes, and the bushes grow in a line like that, a darker line. And the key is to have a particular two places, the beginning and the end have to be there, because if you don't have a beginning and an end and an idea of where you're going in the first place, there's too many other things that are going to distract you to follow that trail. So part of this 17 years has actually been following these trails and having a lot of starting over and going back to it, and learning how to differentiate between ranch roads and trails and deer trails and everything else. So that's how I've been doing it, and then getting on the ground and finding the locations and seeing if I can get with the landowners. So this is the area that I covered, going from Chadbourne to Fort Stockton. It's 197 miles. It would have taken them 45, little over 45 hours straight without stopping, except to change mules and get a quick bite in about every third or fourth station. So we'll start at Fort Chadbourne. This is what got me interested in the historical archaeology when we were asked to volunteer and help out uh, excavate some of these buildings. I worked on two of these buildings here, the officers' quarters here, and over here is the Butterfield station after it was rebuilt. And it was in 2008. You can see here it took, this was a very long project because all of the stones had collapsed in on the buildings and they had to be taken off very carefully, stacked out. You can see on the bottom here how they've been stacked on pallets so that we maintained exactly where every stone had come from within the building so that it could be replaced back into the same location. This is the building was completely collapsed, but here you can see in the 1918, this is what it looked like after it had been abandoned. They were using it at the time just for storage for the ranch. And if you're not familiar with Fort Chadbourne, here's the location down below Abilene and Sweetwater, halfway between San Angelo and those two towns. You can see here that we took it quite a ways down. We were able to get all of the rooms identified, and you can see we had the floor joists there to identify the fact that it did have, in fact, flooring, and all of the chimneys and doors and windows, everything were identified. This is from the report that came out from Larry Riemenschneider, did the report at that time. And this is important, and you'll see later on that this identification of this room allocation turns out to be something that we were able to use in the future as we were going down the line at the different other locations. And here is what it's turned out to be, the museum. It's pretty incredible if you haven't been there. Um, inside, you can see here, they put the coaches and the wagons inside the stage station. And this is the main part of the museum. And the most recent thing is they had a very nice theater built that was just opened up in the last months here. So this is a pretty phenomenal museum. If you haven't been there, you can stop by on the way through this area. And you can see that this is an Emmy Award winning movie that they had created some years back. And it is very, very good. So we start back at the Fort Chadbourne, and I've got some narration for you on firsthand accounts.
Some little delay was experienced here before the wild mules could be caught and harnessed. The mules reared, pitched, twisted, whirled, wheeled, ran, stood still, and cut up all sorts of capers. The wagon performed so many evolutions that I, in fear of my life, abandoned it and took to my heels. The gyrations continued to considerable length, winding up with tangling all the mules pretty well in the harness, the escape of one of the leaders into the woods, and the complete demolition of the top of the wagon, and all were pretty well tired out and disgusted, except those who had nothing to do but look on.
So this was the inaugural ride, and the reason that these mules were doing this is that they purchased all the mules. These were Spanish mules for all of the coaches across Texas. They're a little bit smaller. You can see a picture up here on the left side. A little bit smaller than a standard mule, but they're hardier and they're used to the desert environment. Smaller hoofs, you can see. But they purchased them all, but they had not harness trained them yet. This was on the first ride. So this is why these guys were going crazy, because they had never been harnessed. They had to get them on there, and once they got them on, run for a mile or two as hard as they could, and then they would calm down and they could control them better. So moving down from Fort Chadbourne, you can see that they came down this pretty nice, easy prairie area and came down to the, whoops, let me go back here, back. It came to this hill, and it's actually called Butterfield Hill, and had to climb up that. And I can't think, let's see if I can move this over. There we go.
Fortunately, our course was a clear straight one, leading across an apparently boundless prairie, with not a tree or shrub to be seen, the parched grass almost glistening in the light of the moon. About 2 a.m. we came to a steep and stony hill, obstinately jutting from the prairie, right in our path and impossible of avoidance. One mule could neither be coaxed or driven up, so we had to camp until morning, when, after much difficulty, we ascended the hill and discovered the station fire, miles distant, a mere speck among the trees.
So this part of the trail is well known. Coming down from Fort Chadbourne is a little more difficult to determine because the area has been so agriculture has taken over and pretty much taken out the trail traces. But this part is well known. And then we start moving into Grape Creek, which was for about 50 years, nobody could quite find it. And that was our first task, is to find that one. You see that he said that they could see the fires from the top of the hill. And this is taken from Google Earth looking down. And this is Butterfield Draw, also a known draw that it went down. And you can see that where we eventually was able to find the Grape Creek Station is in fact in the line of sight from the top of that hill, and is about the only place that's in the line of sight of that hill. So we followed it down, and we came to the creek here, coming in a straight line, and then the road takes a 90-degree turn when it gets to the creek. So it was pretty obvious that the station would be in this location, because if it wasn't going to be in this location, they would have gone at the creek in a diagonal way, making it an easier run because they were heading south. But they went straight to the creek and took this turn. So we knew that it was somewhere around this area, had to be. So that's where we started our first search. We did find it. And then we started analyzing the trail. And you can see each one of these is where we actually measured out the ruts to validate the trail all the way up this trail here. And this here, this turn in the creek here is referenced in many of the travelers' journals as being a large pond where they were fishing, and there at that time was a lot of trees. Here you can see the trail leading up to and away from the station, and you can see the depth of it. We would have to drive through it every day to get to the site, and the truck would go so deep into that trail there that it would set off my sensors. So you can see that although the grass is growing up, the trail was still pretty deep.
The station was near Grape Creek, a fine stream, and also near fine timber, two desirable things not to be found everywhere in Texas.
When we were working that area at that time, these pictures are from the time that we were working. So it was pretty nice stream, even and as recently as I think it was 2014 that we were working this. And this turned out to be the location that we first found the detection of artifacts that were underground metal artifacts. You can see this is a drone image, and you can see, if you just look at this for a second, you can see that it's circular in nature. That's the vegetation has grown circular for, and they had built a corral of upright timbers there.
Their corral was built of upright rough timber planted in the ground. They had pitched their tents inside for fear of the Indians and took turns standing guard, 2 hours on and 2 hours off.
So this was the beginning. This was when it was just the very beginning of their building of the station. So they only had a corral at that time. And what we found was in the middle here was what we believed to be a tack shed, work shed type of thing. Found an area of bottle glass in this area here. And normally you would not be finding bottle glass or anything like that inside of a corral, but here that explains it. They were actually tenting inside the corral. And off to the side here, we found our first validation, which was a Spanish mule shoe off to the side here within the corral area. Then what they did was, as time went on, they built themselves a cabin off to the right here. And you can see the footing stones that were left behind for the cabin. And then what they did was they connected from the cabin to the corral to continue building an enclosed fence for protection. You can see here down on the bottom here is the trail going by the front of the corral. So we worked on this one for 3 months, and it was CA and I mostly. And you can see here we flagged every single thing that came out of the ground. We had flags everywhere, and most of them were nails. And what happened was when the building was just disintegrated, the larger nails were on the outside, and the smaller nails on the inside. The smaller ones would have been for the roof shakes and on the roof. It was a log cabin, so the large nails would have been for the window frames. You can see here there was actually in the vegetation, you can see a turn area here, and that turn was needed so that they could make it into or out of the corral when they're heading south or north. Coming in here, it would be easy to make the turn, but they had to make a big turn here, and the vegetation showed that turn. Over here on the right, you can see that we had a line of flags here that was flagging nails. That was the connecting timber fencing that would connect from the corral over to the cabin. And the same thing goes up here. This is the front area here with the entrance. And we kept finding nails along a line that would have been the fencing area that expanded from the corral. Focusing on the cabin, it turned out to be a dog trot cabin with an extension on it. So the right-hand side would have been the bedroom, the breezeway. This was the common area, kitchen common area here. And then this would have been for the extra hands, was the additional room added onto it. And you can see here that from the artifacts that were coming out of this area, it was the common area. And they have cooking, and they had various types of common things that you would find. In the middle area here, sometimes we found buckles and harness things where they were working on something. So with the footing stones and the locations and everything, and then the flagging, which outlined the building, we were pretty sure we had the correct analysis of this building. One of the things that we found was this piece of dishware, and it has a maker's mark on it. LF Field here, and this particular maker's mark showed that this piece was only produced from 1860 to 1870. And of course, the station was open from 58 to 62. So that fit properly into the time frame of the building. So a little story, the month before the departure, the Indians, the Comanches, showed up, and they they were upset with them that they didn't have a better grade of mules for them to steal. And they told them they were going to come back in a month. And if they didn't have better mules for them to steal, they were going to get pretty upset about it. And they didn't really pay attention to it too much, but sure enough, they came back in a month. And this is what they attacked the people just as they were getting ready to leave in 61. And this is the
One fusillade after another was fired at the house without serious results. The house being built of split logs and therefore bulletproof, and the premises enclosed by a picket fence 5 feet high.
So this was a not a firsthand account, but an account by Mrs. Elkins, who lived in Fort Chadbourne when they were brought to Fort Chadbourne. The Indians set the cabin on fire. A firefight started. The station keeper was injured by a shotgun blast, and they had to. They finally ran the Indians off, and they had to go to Fort Chadbourne for help. He was taken to Fort Chadbourne, and he survived, and that's where she was able to get the story of this attack. After leaving Grape Creek, the next location was down at the Middle Concho River. And again, we go back to the account from Ormsby.
A few miles from Grape Creek, we crossed the Concho, and then leaving the old road, we took a new road. We strike the Concho again at a station about 25 miles from Grape Creek.
So he's talking about the old road, and I put a map up here from the time frame. And you can see here where when it came to the river, it turned and went southeast, which was the old road. And then the new road was cutting across to the Middle Concho River here. And so this was one of the first trails that I was able to follow because it's closer to where I live, and that's what got my interest in this particular station. Came down to the river here, ran along the river, and here's Johnson Station here. Here's San Angelo over here, so you can have a reference of the area. This is what it would have looked like. I've used some liberty on photoshopping this. And the reason is because the river has taken a different course now, but at the time, I'm pretty sure this was the correct course of the river. And the location was here. And you can see here, I was pretty surprised that this turned out so well. You can see that open country. There was nothing here at the time. The San Angelo wasn't here. The only thing was Fort Chadbourne, and there was nothing between there, Fort Chadbourne, and here. So this was one of the first stations I worked. We did this one for 6 months. And this is what we were able to figure out. Here's another dog trot cabin. This was only a single regular dog trot with 2 rooms. An old corral here. And the Butterfield Trail came this way. Later on, they straightened it out, which became the Fort Stockton El Paso mail route in the 70s. They came by, but it still came over to here when people would camp here. This is what it looked like when we were over there at the time working it, and I put just an image of the dog trot cabin there for just to imagine what it looked like at the time. And here's a narration of another story of Indian attack.
It was a Friday afternoon at Johnson's Station on the Middle Concho River, and the stage was due any time. Mr. and Mrs. Evanes ran it with 5 other hands. Suddenly, a large group of Comanche appeared out of nowhere. The Indians tried stealing the mules, but they were hobbled with chains and locks, so they killed them. Then, they turned their attention to the station. The men and one woman barricaded themselves into one side of a log cabin that was separated by a 10-foot breezeway. The Indians looted the side that was not barricaded, which included the kitchen. However, they were not satisfied and began using flaming arrows onto the roof to force the occupants out of the barricaded side. The station workers yelled out in Spanish that they were well armed, but would not fire on the Indians if they let them go. The Indians agreed, but when Mrs. Evanes emerged, one of the Indians said in English that the white woman was beautiful and that he wanted her for his own. Mr. Evanes heard the comment and killed the Indian on the spot. The employees ran for cover in a grove of trees with the Indians firing on them. Mr. and Mrs. Evanes were wounded and things were not looking good. Just at that time, the stagecoach appeared on the road. Thinking the coach might be bringing troops from Fort Chadbourne, the Indians quickly departed.
So you can see here, the grove of trees are still there. They're the ones that they had to run to for protection. So this is pretty good verification from a account. This is the work that we were doing at the time. Again, metal detection was the key thing to find stuff that could give us the locations of these different, the buildings and the corral. You can see again, we were flagging just about everything that we found. And off to the right here, you can see we used cartridges. We also used nails similar to the other building, but this one shows the cartridges. And you can see that they actually do show that most of these cartridges came out of the location of where that building was. From that study, we were able to determine from the artifacts that we had the Butterfield Overland Mail period. We had the Fort Chadbourne Cavalry Escort Camp that was in 1867. They called it the permanent camp. They came down and they were rotating companies or detachments, rotating for a month at a time. And what they were doing was escorting the cattle drives that were heading to the Pecos River. This was also a cattle drive rest stop. If the cattle drive came through and there was already the escort was already on with another cattle drive, they had to stop and wait or take the chance on their own to go. After that was finished, the Chadbourne actually closed up and moved to Fort Concho here at San Angelo, and the escort continued from that point on all the way up to 79. And during the 76, 77 period was the Buffalo Hunter Camp at this location. So this was all, they were taking advantage of this abandoned building and good location for watering for all these different things. And then the first ranching started in 89. So these are the things that came out of it that we could identify as the Butterfield station items. This is the trade musket 54 ball here, might have been in that attack. This was an unusual boot pistol bullet that we found, maybe a passenger, not sure about that, but this was an example of something that passengers probably would have carried, or either that or maybe the Mexican help that was there working. This canteen, a large canteen, was buried pretty deep. You can see that, and it's 2 quarts. And these were well known for failure because they were soldered on the top here. So this one must have been failed and they just trashed it. But during the Butterfield period, all the passengers were required to carry as much water as they could on their own. So this could have been a passenger canteen. For the Fort Chadbourne Cavalry, we found 50-70 cartridges, which were unique to the period of time of Fort Chadbourne, and a slug out there. And this M1858 canteen was found on one of the brush piles, actually, next to where the cabin was. For the cavalry period of Fort Concho, we found this Confederate curry comb. Remember, after the Civil War, the Union took over all the warehouses for the Confederacy and took all of their supplies. So that would make sense that a Confederate curry comb would have been now being used by the Union after the Civil War. They were using 45-70s at the time out of Fort Concho, so that places them properly at the time frame. We also found them, this dropped one and several others were in a triangle around that building. So they were like the picket sentries. And we found their typical canteen stuff and this 10 gauge shotgun shell. And in doing the research, found that just about every cavalry unit carried, one man would carry a shotgun. And this is the earliest of the shotgun shells were the full metal shotguns. And 10 gauge was the common gauge for that earlier period of shotguns. So this would have been a cavalry shotgun. For the Buffalo Hunters camp, we found these 45 100s and 45 110s. So those are quite obviously buffalo hunting cartridges, a primer removal tool also, and this is the long range, obviously, for the buffalo hunting. We also had the documentation that they were on the Middle Concho during the hunting in 1876. And then the ranching period, we found these items. This is the bolt that holds the seat down for the carriage, and a Betts beer opener, which would be on they would give these out when you bought a case of beer. Then they give you the opener that would attach to the wall. And this opener broke. I guess they used it so many times that it broke off on them. So now we have everything for that camp, and we move on across the Middle Concho River. There was actually two trails here. One was the 70s that I told you about, was a shortcut that was created by Colonel Grierson for his men when they were going to Fort Stockton, and then continued on. The stations were between this one and head of the Concho was about 32 miles, which was an extreme distance for mules at that time. But they did it for a while, but then they determined that they needed another station in between. And so they had another station put in 1860. So this was kind of a last thought. They obviously didn't know the war was coming, but this one is only 18 miles. But this gave them the rest that they needed to cover this really difficult crossings here. And it was just recently that I was able to find this station. I wasn't able to get on the property because they don't want anybody on it, but I was able to find it through a 1867 map by Lieutenant Colonel Strang out of Fort Stockton. And he took a cartographer with him on a trip from Stockton to Chadbourne in 1867. And they annotated all the stations along the way. And they also annotated the mileage in great detail. So this is the station here. And you can see they actually annotated North Prong draw here. And that is still North Prong draw. And by using that, I was able to find the remnant of the station. And here you've got the main trail. And then what they did was they did a cutoff to come over to this station and then back out to the cutoff. And this next slide shows you the remnant of the station from above. So this one was built in a square. You can see the trail leading into the station across this field here. And coming in here, here's the trace of the trail that I showed you earlier leading up to it. And the unique thing about this one was they had it entered in on this side here, which is the east side, and then it crossed at an angle and then came out the west side here. So it went straight across these two walls here. So that's kind of unique to the stations that I've seen throughout the other area and all the way up through New Mexico. After that, they left another 18 miles to head of the Concho station. Head of the Concho was a well-known station. It was done archaeologically excavated in 1996. A report was in the TAS uh, journal by Larry Riemenschneider back then. And it was a stone building and compound. And they would drive straight in here for protection of everybody and the mules and everything while they were doing the change out. And this is another recent one that I took a liberty of showing you why this station was here. And you can tell by, at the time, this creek was running real good. This was the best water, and it was the last water before they continued west. So this was a very good spot to have a station. They would always put the water, you could always give water from the for the animals from the river, but they wanted spring-fed creeks for their water if they could find it. And they always put their stations as close as they could to some kind of spring-fed creek. Okay. Next. So then from there on, they came across the very, very dry area. Although up in the northern panhandle, that's Llano Estacado, they also called this the Llano Estacado because it was so barren and dry. I've been able to recently this trail exactly by using some of the most recent imagery and getting right down to it, and you can actually see the trail. And I followed it all the way through. It runs through this draw almost all the way. And it's an interesting way that they did it. You could see that they would go from left to right, left to right. They stay off to the sides, not go down the middle. And I did a full video of this fly through, and it's up on our website if you want to go see it. The next place they reached was the Llano Estacado station. This is another one where nobody's actually worked it or been to it, but I was able to find it and the remnant of it. The reason that we know that this is correct is, again, going back to the Lieutenant Colonel Strang map and his mileage. And you can see here that it says Old Stay Station, Flat Rock Ponds. So we now know that it was definitely at Flat Rock Ponds. This is the station remnant outline, similar to the one at Mather. And you can actually see the trace of the trail coming around the bend and going to the station here. And then one further thing to validate this station's location is this is the Flat Rock Ponds here that I've annotated here. And here's the trace of the trail coming this way and then across around into that location there. So now we know that that is in fact the Llano Estacado station. After that, they came another 30 miles and came to this 40-mile mesa boundary that they had to get through. And there was only one way through, and it's the Castle Gap. So everybody, wagon trains, freighters, Butterfield, everybody had to go through this gap. In the bottom here, this is a drawing by an artist that was on the 1850 John Russell Bartlett Boundary Commission train that went through there. And this is looking from the west to the east after they had come out of the gap area here. So this was important. This was an important thing. They also put in a station later on called the Castle Gap Station for the same reason that they had the other Mather station put in, just to start to add more stations in because it was putting too much strain on the animals without enough water. This is a zoomed in of the trail going through the gap. This is part of the video that I did, but I wanted to show you here. You can actually see the trail, and you can see how they tried to stay out of the bottom of the gap draw here as much as possible. So they would, here you see they go left, and then they go up on the right, and then eventually they got to the point where they had to go right down the middle. There's nothing else that they could do, but as much as they could, they stayed to the sides of these draws. As they come out of the gap here, heading to Horsehead Crossing, we come to the Castle Gap Station. The trail on the right would have been for wagon trains or cattle drives or freighters or whatever that were going to continue on to Horsehead Crossing. And the stagecoach would stop at the Castle Gap Station. This one wasn't large enough to drive straight into. It's pretty small. Here's the remnant vegetation of the small station and the trail going by it here. And you can see the trail went by it, but did not go into it. These are images that pictures that were taken by Glenn Ely when he was there. Not much left of this one, but you can tell it was a limestone station. It was only there for a little while, but later it was used by the military, by the infantry to, after the Civil War, the infantry actually were put in there to help travelers coming through the gap for heading west. And finally, some LiDAR imagery to show that, again, you've got this rectangular area left over. So then you make it to the Pecos River, and another narration by Ormsby.
As I lay dozing on the seat, about 3 o'clock on Sunday morning, I heard a cry from Jones that we had reached the Pecos River, and there we were, true enough, right into it. After helloing and blowing our horn, we obtained an answer, as we supposed, from the other side of the river, telling us to drive upstream, which advice we followed, when to our astonishment we found ourselves in camp on the same side of the river. The fact is, the Pecos makes such a turn here that you can hardly tell which side you are on.
So the station here is in the next bend from the normal crossing point. And again, we're going back to Colonel, this was by Lieutenant Colonel Hunt map. And he came through in 69 and he annotated the old station, which matches up with this bend of the river. And there is nothing left of the station, but the vegetation once again reveals where and how big the station was. And that is because the vegetation is growing still to this day better in this one location than any place else around it. On the left side, you can see the old trace of the trail coming into the back side. So this would have been the corral in the back. And you can see here on the right side that it was adobe. And it was about 3 feet thick was the walls, which was common for the adobe. This station and the stations farther up the Pecos were all done with adobe. We walked over there and did some metal detecting years back, but the floods have pretty much wiped everything off that's anywhere near the river for the entire Pecos area. We've found the same thing over and over again. Anything that was near the river is pretty much gone. They decided to change the route in 59 and not be going up the east side to the New Mexico line there and crossing over. They wanted to go to Fort Stockton after it was created at Camp Stockton at the time. And so what they did was from the station, they would drive down to one side while another coach would come from Fort Stockton up to the other side, and the two would meet across the river at the same time, usually in the middle of the night. and then they would cross the river in a skiff. And we'll show you where the water level probably was at that time. We validate that through several different things, but here is a actual quote from Butterfield himself as he was on the trip.
We descended into the broad valley of the Picos River and halted at a station of adobe. Crossing the river in a skiff, we took another waiting coach and soon struck the old trail of the Comanche.
So what he's talking about is the Comanche Trail came down from Comanche Springs, which became Fort Stockton, and they would cross at this location here and then head to Big Spring. And here is where the coaches were crossing, and then they would come out and they would cross, and then they would actually end up merging together. They used the old Comanche Trail for their road to Fort Stockton.
As the stage rumbled away from the crossing, 8 beaten paths, side by side, indicated the frequency of their bloody raids into northern Mexico for cattle, horses, and children.
So just by following the 2 different lines here, we know that this is the spot that he's talking about, that he crossed the trail. And this is part of the tour that I give when we do the Horsehead Crossing event. Let's see. Yeah. So the trail was very well, you could see it very well from above on the Google Earth all the way across this area. And then the stagecoach had one more stop before reaching Fort Stockton, and this one was called Antelope Spring Station. Antelope Spring was up here at this area here. It was a stopping point for all travelers, wagon trains, for example. It wasn't a very good spring. It was they called it a pretty spring because it would reflect a lot, but it had a lot of chemicals and salt and everything in it. But it was the only water that they could find at the time. And the wagon trains would stop there. The station was over here at a different location. We found the road leading to and out from the main road here. And this is what's left of the station. Just the foundational stones along the walls. And we found that the wall stones had been bulldozed over to kind of where these large trees are right here. And there was a large pile of stones over there. So the walls had been pushed over into a pile. This is why they're not in this location here. And there's some of the items that we found laying around in the station area there. You can see, if you look closely, you can see the wagon ruts in the middle of this trail here. So we were able to identify the station, and this gets back to the Fort Chadbourne thing that I was talking about. It looks like they used the exact same design of Fort Chadbourne to build this station also. You see how the rooms match up almost perfectly. The length is exactly the same. The width was only 3 feet narrower on the Antelope Spring Station than the Fort Chadbourne Station. So they used the same design. One of the most interesting things we found about this station was they built a 530-yard water ditch from that spring coming down to the station. But as I said, it was very heavy alkaline and chemical. And they knew at the time that if you run that water through a very, very long ditch, you're going to, a lot of the chemicals will escape during the run down a long ditch line. And it ran around the station and then went into a settling pond. So here is where all of the heavy things would settle into. And then they had another ditch that came out and to an extraction pond. This was, to me, was unbelievable to know that they had figured all this out to get good, clean water out of a very, very difficult alkaline spring. But they did it and it worked. Uh, they would come in across that ditch. They would drop off the passengers. They actually had a porch built to greet the passengers, and then drive around, do a change of mule, then they could drive around and pick them back up again and head out to Fort Stockton, or vice versa, coming the other way. And then they continued on, and you can see the trail here that comes in and around the western tip of 7 Mile Mesa, the well-known if you've driven by Fort Stockton, and continues on into Fort Stockton. They did not have a station in Fort Stockton for a changeout. They just dropped off passengers and mail and then continued on. And then they would head to Leon Springs, which was where their station was. And looking back at it, the distance between Horsehead Crossing and Antelope Springs was 23 miles. And then the distance when they added it on through Fort Stockton became 20 miles. So it's a good distance between stations that way. So that's why they did not actually put a station in Fort Stockton. So that's the story of our 17 years of going down the trail and finding these stations. The entire report is on our website there, and you can download it. It's actually something that I put up on Amazon, but you can download it for free off of our website, and has all the details that you would ever want on this entire journey of across Texas for the Butterfield Trail. So I guess I'll take questions if there are any questions.
Yes, there's actually one in the chat from Scott. It says, thanks, Tom. For someone who is interested in tracing out old trails, what are some tips that you would recommend for researchers? How important is topography for tracing out trails based on your time on the ground?
It's real important. As I was talking at the beginning there, when you're trying to follow the trails, you can get distracted from all sorts of different other trails going in all sorts of different directions. So if you lose the trail, you have to start looking at the topography to figure out, okay, so what would be the proper way to go for a wagon, and look for the easiest proper way to go through this area. They avoided hills, obviously. They avoided going through any deep gullies and draws that are one after another. They would find a way around those. And so when you go back and have to start over, when you lose yourself, then you go back and you say, okay, it's probably going this direction, and you know it's going in a certain direction, west, for example. And you start looking at, okay, did the trail take a turn to get around this bad piece of topography and stuff? And then you can usually find, oh yeah, this is the way that they went, and then annotate it and start following it. I usually follow it at about 3,000 feet eye altitude in the Google Earth, and at a pretty steep angle. So, or looking out so you see a long distance, so you can see the trail moving off into a long distance away from you, to validate that in fact is continuing on. And the other thing is, any lines that are perfectly straight, you can take those off right away. And then any ranch roads or lines that follow fence lines or property boundaries can be eliminated right away. And then The other thing is not to get distracted by deer trails.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
I have a question when you have a chance.
Yeah.
This is Tom Standifer. I live in Azle, but we have some land in Jack County that is near Wizard Wells that I just last December published in the North Texas Archaeological Journal an article about us trying to decide or figure out if that might have been the stage stop when they moved the route south to go through Decatur. And I would love it if you would look at that and see if our arguments make sense to you, and if you have any clues or tips on how we could go further to determine if it really was.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with which one you're talking about or anything. So if you could send me the information and the
Okay.
location,
Yeah,
I can take a look.
Do you get are you a member of North Texas Archaeological Society?
No.
Okay. I wasn't sure. If I can figure out a way to send you that journal, I'll do that, because that's got it all explained in the article.
Yeah, Aaron,
Tommy, I can send him the journal and also your contact info.
That'd be great. That'd be
Okay,
great.
so Tom, I'll send that to you.
okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've had other people ask me about one particular that comes to mind is a person who bought property outside of El Paso, between El Paso and the tanks. And he asked me if the trail went through his property. So I went just using Google Earth, and I was able to find, yes, in fact, it did go through his property. And I was actually able to find there was not only one trail, but there was 3 trails that were going through his property, because they would use them at different parts of the season. When it got wet, they had to go to a different trail uphill, so they wouldn't get bogged down in the lower land. And so he had what he thought was a deep arroyo, and it was actually the old trail. So I've done this for other people before, validating something, but it's the same thing that we do for our stuff. You have to go in and look at the documentation and look at the Google Earth and all of that other stuff.
All right. Well, I appreciate any advice that when you look at it, you can give us.
Yeah, I'd be glad to.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Well, thanks for letting me show you everything.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for speaking with us tonight, Tom. That was a fantastic presentation. My birds think so too.
Hey, Aaron, I have another question
Okay.
in the chat.
Oh, can you please provide a short overview of the Butterfield Overland Mail Route and John Butterfield and his company for those not familiar?
It went from St. Louis to San Francisco. How's that? I'm not sure what how.
Short overview. I mean, I don't know. I feel like that fits.
Yeah. I'm not sure what else to tell you. It's from the northeast border of Texas down through what I showed you, and then back up in the early period, back up to the New Mexico borderline, and would cross the river at that point, and then cross the Guadalupe Mountains, and then go to El Paso. The second period, they went through the forts, and so they went through Fort Stockton, and then Fort Davis and Kitman, and then on to El Paso. So that was the essentially the route going, and getting to El Paso was the key to everything. And then it would just continue on across New Mexico, Arizona, everything onto basically the Los Angeles area, and then cut up to San Francisco. And it was 26 days straight without stopping.
So I have another question. In your research, Tom, given this was like at the prior to and just before the Civil War,
Right.
was there a surprisingly little or small number of Native American attacks on the Butterfield route,
They
considering how often they traveled it?
this was the beginning. There were a few attempts. If the Indians saw that they were well armed, they would pretty much leave them alone at that particular time. This was kind of new to the Indians, and they weren't quite sure what was going on. But after the Civil War, you know, it was on, and then they were attacking as much as they could because they realized that the stagecoaches were an indication that the spread to the west was going to continue and continue to bring more and more people across their land. And that's when they decided, okay, we're along with the wagon trains and the freighters and anything else, they were going to attack as many things as they could. So this was the early period, and they didn't get attacked as much.
So did John Butterfield lay out this entire route from St. Louis to California?
Yes, yes, he did. Yeah, it was quite quite a lot of work, and he pretty much knew he was going to get the contract. The government contract was the key to the whole thing, because that's where the main funding was going to come. Everything else was additional funds for passengers or for any kind of freighting that would go along with it, for additional. But the knew it was coming. He had politicians that were working in Washington that were telling him he was going to get it. So he was able to build it ahead of time so that it was ready to go when the contract was ready to be let. But he actually didn't make money at it. It was actually a failure economically. It actually had to be taken over later on by the Wells Fargo company because they were actually losing money. So it wasn't a big success economically.
So one last thing, there's an extensive, is it a 3-volume set that a husband and wife did on the Butterfield Overland route?
Yes, the Conklings.
Is there a cheaper version?
No.
I looked online, and that's pretty, isn't it like $700-800 for that set?
Yes, it is. It's very expensive. Even if you buy it through whatever cheap, eBay or whatever, it's going to be expensive. Yeah, they did it in the 50s. And they weren't one of the things that we found was they weren't always right. And the Grape Creek Station was one example of that. They were able to go talk with the landowners at the time, and this is, I guess, 52 or something, and they asked them where the station was. And the landowners told them, well, from our house, you go out, and what they wrote down was a mile and a quarter from our house southwest. That's what they wrote in the book. And people had been going out there for many, many years, looking in the southwest a mile and a quarter from that house, and nobody was able to find it. They dug up all sorts of things. In fact, they got the owners of the property pretty upset by digging all over the place. Mm-hmm. Well, when we went out there, we didn't bother using that information. We just looked at the road and followed the road. But afterwards, when we did find it, I measured it out, and it was a mile and a quarter northwest.
Oh.
So either they took it down wrong, or it got changed in the book. by the editing or who knows what, but everybody was looking the wrong way because they somehow got the information incorrectly from the landowners or typed it in incorrectly in their book.
Tom, is Paul Cates.
Yeah.
Another, we excavated the Pine Springs station in Guadalupe Pass, and the Conklins had gotten the image reversed in their publication.
Ah,
The
interesting.
whole structure was flipped over.
Well, that
So,
kind of
again,
tells me that it might have been the editing of the book, or somebody made a mistake on our part, or the part that I'm talking about, that somebody typed in wrong Southwest when it should have said Northwest. But it was to our benefit. Nobody found it. Yeah, we also had a little bit of a disagreement with Glenn Ely in his book. He went in and spoke with there was two owners, brother, and each one of them got 20,000 acres. One was north and one was south and this area that we were at was kind of right in the middle, right on the borderline between the two property boundaries. And what he did was he went and talked to the brother and asked him, "Do you know where the station is?" And I found this out from the sister. And he said, "No, I don't know where it is, but up there at the spring, there is a bunch of stuff that looks like there was some kind of people were living there." And so they went up to the spring, and in fact, there was a lot of stuff, and that's the stuff that's in the book. And Glenn Ely put that in the book. But that's all he did. He took the word from the brother, but what they were looking at was the spring area, not the creek area. And so he got a little upset with me when I went out and said it wasn't there. It was a different place after he had already published.
So, Tom, I have another question to ask.
Yeah.
Given this part of Texas, there's obviously only so many good places to camp. Do you see evidence that people were like camping at these locations over and over? And how difficult is it to separate artifacts from different occupations?
Yes, because it was the only road for a long time, everybody was camping there after all of these stations were abandoned. They were the most likely place to go, and they were a good location, or a good separation distance, about an 8-hour distance, for example, from one place to another. So when you reach that location, it's going to have the water that you're looking for. It's going to have the grass you're looking for. And if you're lucky, it would have the old abandoned building, depending on when they were doing it, that they could use for protection or for weather or whatever. So yes, everybody was using those locations for camping. So when you start pulling everything out of the ground, you just have to make sure that you're doing your best research to see if you can tie it down to a period or something. Obviously, the military stuff can be defined out pretty well because the military cartridges and the military equipment is unique. And if you get to the other things, it gets a little more difficult. We were lucky on the buffalo hunters, for example. That was a lucky find in that case. But sometimes if it's just the type of things that you would find from cooking or something like that, then yeah, it makes it pretty difficult.
Thank you.
I think that's all we have for Q&A. Again, thank you so much, Tom. That was a great presentation. And I think we'll go ahead and get the business meeting started.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot.